Hello everyone. Today we will be reviewing custom cards. Not we, just me. I'm the one who reviews these. No one else, well, except for the other custom card reviewers. I'll be happy to know I am currently the 5th most ranked, highest custom card reviewer on the custom card side of Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube, which is very thriving. There's lots of them out there. It's totally not just me. So in this video, I'll be going over 5 one-off cards that could potentially fit in any deck. They don't have to be good in every single deck, just, strong one-offs, kind of like Monster Reborn, stuff like that. And to start this off, we have Desperate Gambit. This is a normal spell card, which has the effect where you can pay life points in increments of 1,200, but no more than 6,000, to target and destroy one card in the field for every 1,200 life points paid. So if you use this card to its maximum life point amount, you can target and destroy 5 cards on the field. Now, being able to destroy 5 cards on the field for 6,000 life points is really good. This card is also kind of softly limited. It's basically a full board wipe. Like, if you can selectively destroy 5 cards on the field, you can basically break apart any board that just doesn't straight up negate this effect, or, prevent themselves from being destroyed. It also can just completely clear out back row. It's like a 6,000 life point Harpy's Feather Duster. I think that's what the person who sent it through Twitter said. Obviously, this is pretty good, and the 6,000 life point cost to it, I think, does a really unique job of almost balancing it out. To truly balance this, I'd probably increase the life point cost from 1,200 to 2,000. That way you can only target and destroy 3 cards on the field at the cost of losing, 6,000 life points. And even then, that would still be really good. And I could totally see this being played in a whole bunch of different decks. Currently, it's broken, but I like the idea of it, paying an exorbitant amount of life points in order to destroy cards on the field. Since, you don't really need your life points. As long as you have 1 life point, you can win the game. And if you can clear your opponent's field selectively for 6,000 life points, that's really good. Simple, yet seems like it's trying to get balanced out a little bit. And also, if you're playing a life point gain deck, it's even better. Nobody plays those. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who does that. So when I say if you're playing a life point gain deck, I really just mean me. No one else plays those kinds of gimmicky decks. So next up we have Gate Enforcer. This card is kind of like a Nibiru, and also kind of like a Maxi. Let's go over it. So, you can only control 1 Gate Enforcer, okay? During the main phase, if your opponent special summoned 3 or more monsters this turn, you can then special summon this card from your hand, as a quick effect. Okay, basically like Nibiru, except instead of 5 cards, it's only 3. But that's kind of just where their similarities end. So let's go on to its actual effect once it brings itself out during your opponent's turn. This card cannot leave the field during the turn this card's effect was activated. That's not really an effect in real Yu-Gi-Oh! That's only really an effect that happens in the anime. So, that's a brand new effect right there. This card can't leave the field. Ooh, it should just have this card is unaffected by other card effects for the turn. It's basically the same thing, except that's an actual effect that exists in the game. Okay, and during the turn this card was special summoned from the hand. For every 3 special summons performed by your opponent, the original owner of this card gains 1 additional normal summon during their next main phase 1. So this is why I said it's kind of like Nibiru and Maxi. Because of Nibiru, the obvious thing of your opponent summons a bunch of monsters, and then you get to summon this card from your hand. except it's not as devastating as Nibiru, where it gets to tribute all your opponent's monsters. And then the Maxi is, this card allows you to gain advantage based on your opponent going into too many combo plays. Whereas Maxi lets you draw a card every time your opponent special summons, this card gives you an additional normal summon for every 3 special summons. So potentially, you could do a few extra normal summons during your turn, since it's every 3 instead of every 1. That's okay, I guess. There's some decks I can definitely take advantage of that more than others. Like, off the top of my head, I don't know, a gadget deck, they love being able to normal summon a lot of times per turn. They would love this. And I'm kind of confused on its effect a little bit. Like, it says for every 3 special summons, performed during the turn this card is summoned. Does that count the special summons from before this card hit the field, or after? Like, if it's before it hits the field, then you're guaranteed at least 1 extra normal summon. But if it's after, then your opponent could just stop after 2 more special summons, and then you would gain nothing except this card out on the field. In which case, your opponent would be kind of dumb to stop there. Because your opponent's just getting 1 extra normal summon if you just keep going for all those combos. And maybe a second one, because you would have to, assuming it counts cards from before this card hit the field, of course, you'd have to special summon 9 times before your opponent got 3 normal summons. And, that's good and everything, but that's not really broken. There is a card that allows you to gain 3 normal summons for the turn. Well, I mean, this is additional. So 3 additional. There isn't a card that lets you get 3 additional. There is one that lets you have 2 additional ones. It's like a card that requires you to activate as a chain link 3 or higher or something, which actually saw play in gadget decks because I like extra normal summons. So the effect, I like the idea of it gaining a whole bunch of normal summons off your opponent's combos. And then the fact that it, can't leave the field, I've changed that to unaffected by card effects. Just because that's an effect that actually exists. Even though it's not really something I generally suggest to custom cards, because usually people, they go a little crazy with the whole, not affected by card effects type thing, where they'll just slap it onto everything and make everything broken. So I'm very appreciative when I see people resist adding that clause to their effects. So I like the idea of it. It doesn't seem powerful enough though. The normal summons are great. But I think it would probably have to not be so confusing for how you get those normal summons. Hey, if you got a normal summon for every special summon your opponent did, now we're talking. And even then, some decks can't even use that many normal summons. So let's go on to the next one. Now, this card is interesting. MASTERWORKS TUSK Shooter. So, it's a level 5 synchro monster with generic materials, where each monster your opponent controls with 2,000 attack or less cannot activate effects. So it's just a straight up lockdown on your opponent's monster effects for their weak monsters. And I do notice that this effect doesn't designate where it negates the effects, so I'd assume it works on hand traps and graveyard effects as well. So, if your opponent activates a monster effect, and it has 2,000 attack or less, it cannot activate those effects. So as soon as this card comes out, your opponent is basically shut out of all kinds of effects for the turn. Most people use a ton of monsters with less than 2,000 attack in order to go into their combo plays to bring out their big monsters from the extra deck. So that's a pretty good shutdown. Also, it has a second effect where, on a quick effect, you can reduce this monster's attack by 300 to inflict 600 points of damage to your opponent. Now, I like this because it kind of, turns this card into an alternative Gagaga Cowboy, where if you need to burn your opponent for, a little bit of damage, you could just bring this card out and do that little bit of damage Then again, since it is a synchro monster, it's much harder to use than a cowboy, which was a generic rank 4 monster. But I do like the versatility of it because it could be used as a cowboy, and since it's a quick effect, you could do 1200 points of damage to your opponent. You know, like bring this card out during the main phase 2, inflict 600 damage, and then after your opponent draws a card, inflict another 600 damage. So that's 1200 damage right there, which is really good. That's enough to finish off most people who might have barely survived a battle phase. You know, the reason Gaga Cowboy was so good, even though it only did 800 damage. So this card is really good. It might be too good. That's the problem with it. That lockdown is really great, and it only requires a level 5 synchro summon. There's so many decks that go into level 5 synchro summons because currently there's a really good level 5 synchro monster that, yeah. Let's go on to the next one. Next up, we have Paranormal Fusion. This card is basically like an advanced ritual art, except for fusion summons. So, you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck, using normal monsters from your deck as the fusion materials. So, if you wanted to bring out a 5-headed dragon, for example, you could use this card in order to send 5 normal dragon-type monsters from your deck to the graveyard, which is pretty crazy. And then for the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters. There's also that new Dark Magician card, which can technically use 2 fusion monsters as its materials. I mean, 2 normal monsters as its materials. So this card would be really great for that. Even though there's already a card that can bring it out, the Red Eyes Fusion one, this card's better though, because it just, for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters. Whereas the Red Eyes Fusion locks you out of summoning anything else during the turn, so you can't special summon before you use the card, which really limits it. Also, this card has Fusion in its name, so it can be used with the Predaplant Link monster, which is always great. If your opponent controls more monsters than you, you can banish this card from your graveyard to special summon one normal monster from your graveyard. So that's a really good graveyard effect. You can basically just special summon a normal monster from your graveyard. You know, under the condition that your opponent controls more cards than you do, so you can't really use it to combo during your first turn. It's more of a second turn type thing, I guess. It's still really good, especially like if you're behind and you can get like a free special summon and then go into combo plays to maybe come back from that. The first effect is also really good. I'm surprised something like this doesn't exist already, you know, since they have Advanced Ritual Art, which basically has this effect except for ritual summoning. But then again, that's for ritual summoning, so it's kind of a little bit more balanced. And then this card, the materials are so much, you know, there's a potential to send so many cards to the graveyard with this. Especially if you target something that can require, like, you know, a near infinite amount of materials. Just as long as they can all realistically be normal monsters. Okay, next up we have Sharing the Pain. This one required me to read it a couple times to understand what it's doing. So, it's a quick play spell card. The effect of this card starts off with an activation requirement, where this card can only be activated if you have 2 or more cards in your hand. And then, assuming you activate this card, send 1 card on the field to the graveyard to activate this card. Discard 1 card. So, what this card does is it basically allows you to send any card on the field to the graveyard as a cost in order to discard a card from your hand as an effect. So, really good in Dark World decks because that's non-targeted, non-destruction removal of anything. So you can send something that's normally indestructible to the graveyard with this. And then you get to just discard a card as an effect, which is honestly only good in some decks. It's a 1-for-1 trade that requires you to get rid of a card in your hand. So that's not 1-for-1, it's a 2-for-1 trade. You go -1 with this effect. But the effect is to get rid of a card on the field as a cost. So, they can't negate the effect. That's the tricky thing about it. Because if they negate this card, they're just going to negate you discarding a card from your hand. Because you've already sent the card on the field to the graveyard, in order to activate this. It's pulling a tricky one on you. That's why they don't usually have cards which, destroy your opponent's monsters as a cost. Because there's like no counterplay to that. It's basically spell speed 4, but more trickily. And that's pretty good, actually, despite the fact that it's basically a -1. Well, you destroy one of your opponent's cards, you trade off one in your hand. It is a -1. You have to use 2 cards for it, though. All right, and next up, bonus one. This is one I created. It's kind of a mess looking back on it. But this one is called Thunderbolt, which I think is the name of Raigeki. Like, I'm pretty sure Raigeki in Japanese just means Thunderbolt. I'm not 100% on that, though. So, this is a quick play spell card that basically has the effect where you must discard 3 cards to activate this. That means this card is serious business. And then after this card resolves, negate the effects and then destroy 1 monster on the field. And then negate the effects of all cards your opponent controls and activates of the same type as the destroyed monster until the end of your opponent's 3rd end phase after using this card. So that's a mouthful. The way it's worded is basically non-targeted destruction. So it's able to negate the effects and then destroy without targeting 1 monster on the field. That way it gets rid of any kind of maybe destruction immunity they might have. And then it will negate the effects of all monsters that share its type. So if your opponent is playing a deck that's primarily dominated by, say, thunder monsters, then it can shut down your opponent for 3 turns and win you the game, essentially. All at the cost of, 4 cards. 4 cards from your hand. That's why it requires you to discard 3. Discarding 3 is honestly too much for that kind of effect. But if you do get it off, and your opponent is playing 1 type of monster only, which, there are a lot of decks that do that, it completely shuts them down. That's kind of the point of it. Yeah, it's still kind of steep. But also, it has a graveyard effect, where if this card is in your graveyard, except the turn it was sent there, you can banish this card from the graveyard to destroy 1 monster on the field. Now, since this card is a quick play spell card, I don't know if you can actually use the graveyard effect as a quick effect. If it was a trap card, you would be able to. You'd just be able to destroy one of your opponent's monsters during their turn in order to disrupt plays, which would be pretty good. I don't think spell cards work that way, though. I'm pretty sure you'd have to use this during your turn as a spell speed 1 effect, even if this card is a quick play, because to my knowledge, I can't think of any graveyard effects that are from quick play spell cards. I'm sure there's probably one, but I can't think of any off the top of my head, which means there probably isn't any, because I have a lot of the cards memorized. Even so, that's kind of a broken graveyard effect. That's kind of the point of it. It's supposed to be really strong, but, it has a 3-card discard cost, so it's totally worth it. And it's also worded very confusingly, so I'm not even sure it actually works in the intended way. And it really should have been a trap card so that it would have spell speed 2 destruction, but if it doesn't, then it doesn't need to be a quick play spell card. So this is why this one's just kind of an extra one. It's just one I made for fun. So with that being said, those are all of the cards. I asked in my last video, send me some strong one-offs, and these were some of the ones that were sent in. For the next one, I don't really have a theme, so you can send in whatever you want, but also remember, you can now send in 8 cards instead of the original 5. Still through Twitter though, that will be linked in the video description. So until next time.